All right, welcome back. Hononegah Honors Algebra 2. Again, our pre-chapter here, so this is P.2, um, solving absolute value equations. So everything today we're going to be talking about is absolute value. So an absolute value, the technical definition of an absolute value is the distance from zero, which is why it's always positive. So if I said, what is the absolute value of 4, you would say that's 4, because that's how far away 4 is on a number line to 0. If I said, what is the absolute value of negative 4? Again, you would say 4 because that is the distance on a number line from 0. Is that how we normally deal with absolute value? No, but the technical definition of an absolute value is the distance from 0. So if I ask you to evaluate, meaning I ask you to put a number into this particular problem, 4y, and ask you to evaluate that. There's no equal sign. We're just solving, or we're just evaluating, sorry, this particular expression. So now, whatever you do inside the absolute value, so 5 times negative 2 is negative 10, minus 7 is negative 17. So doing stuff inside the absolute value is kind of like doing stuff inside of a parenthesis. Now, what is the absolute value of negative 17? Well, it's positive 17, because that's how far away from 0 it is. And then 1.4 plus 17 is 18.4. So again, evaluating an expression. Now let's start actually talking about an equal sign. And this is going to look at it in a little bit different way. Anytime you solve an absolute value equation, it must equal a positive value. So this value over here must be positive. If it is not positive, if you have an absolute value equaling a negative, it is no solution. So it's an automatic. So what is the absolute value of x equaling 8? Well, there's 2 locations that this equation would be true. If I was at positive 8 in for x, it would equal 8. And if I put negative 8 in for x, it would equal 8. So anytime an absolute value equation equals a positive, then you will write 2 equations, one for the positive value and one for the negative value. Because again, there's 2 situations in which you are a positive distance. Okay, if I said I went 10 feet to the right and 10 feet to the left, I'm still going 10 feet, but I could go either direction. So basically you're looking at a number line situation, and there's 2 possible answers. One if you went positive 8, and one if you went negative 8. Now, so let's talk about this more in theory then. If I wanted to solve any absolute equation as long as b was positive, then the answer to this would be for positive b and for negative b, meaning I went to the right on the number line or I went to the left on the number line. So remember, the absolute value has to be by itself and it must equal a positive. So we're good here. So now, then 2x plus 6, whatever is inside the absolute value needs to equal the positive 8. And whatever is inside the absolute value needs to equal the negative 8. Notice, I did not change anything about what was inside the absolute value. So that doesn't change, merely how far you go, a positive and a negative 8. Subtract 6 and divide by 2. Subtract 6 and divide by 2. I am not going to make you check your answers all the time, but I am going to do it in this particular question. Plug 1 in for x. 2 times 1 plus 6 would be 8. Is the absolute value of 8 equal 8? Yes, it does. So now, 2 times negative 7 plus 6. 2 times negative 7 is negative 14, plus 6 would be negative 8. Is the absolute value of negative 8 equal positive 8? Yes. How you're going to know this ahead of time is if you have an absolute value by itself, and I stress that, by itself, equaling a positive, then it's going to work. So now, the absolute value, notice, is not by itself. So I need to do that first. You must isolate the absolute value. You cannot distribute into an absolute value. So I've isolated the absolute value. Absolute value of x minus 6 is equal to negative 9. This was the red flag we talked about earlier. Absolute values do not equal negatives. So that doesn't work. You can't have an absolute value equaling a negative. Stop right there. Don't go any further. Don't make one for the positive and one for the negative because you can't go a negative distance. Isolate the absolute value. Remember, that is the first thing you have to get. You have to get the absolute value by itself before you can make any decisions about where to go from there. So, do I have an absolute value equaling a positive? Yes. So I can do this. So I take 1, whatever's inside the absolute value equaling the positive distance, and I know I'm going to say negative, but it's not negative distance. So basically what it's saying is you're going 14 to the right and 14 to the left. Solve. So x is equal to 7 is one answer to this problem. Adding 7, divide by 3, x is equal to negative 7/3 is the other one. This is an interesting, what if you wanted to write an equation for a scenario? You will always do this. Whatever is inside the absolute value is x minus the central or the middle, equaling the range, like how far are you allowed to go. So you enter a jelly bean guessing contest. You must guess within 5 to win. There are 486 in the jar. Write an absolute value equation that would help you find the highest and lowest guess. So I'm going to write the equation, and then we're going to solve it and see if this makes sense. So the absolute value of x minus 486. 486 is the exact number. That is the central number of jelly beans in this particular jar, and I'm allowed to be within 5. So again, x minus the central number equaling the range, what you're allowed to be within. Let's solve this, see if this makes sense. So x minus 486 equals positive 5, so that's going to the right. X minus 486 equals negative 5, that's going to the left on the number line. Add 486, so you're allowed to have a guess as high as 491 jelly beans. Add 486. You're allowed to have a guess of 481. I'm going to abbreviate jelly beans. Inequalities. All right, so again, you have to isolate the absolute value inequalities. You need to break it into 2 cases. A less than is an and situation. A greater than is an or situation. Always change the inequality sign when taking the opposite or the right-hand side. So when you are dealing with the opposite direction, okay, you must change the inequality symbol. All right, here we go. Absolute value of 4x minus 9 is less than or equal to 21. First of all, this has to be a positive just like before. If it's not a positive, we're going to deal with those scenarios here in just a little bit. Less than. If I am dealing with something that is less than, okay, you are dealing with an and situation. Okay, you have an and situation. You are smaller than 21. Anytime you're dealing with a greater than situation, you're dealing with the extremes or an or situation. So now, whatever is inside the absolute value must be both less than 21 and greater than negative 21. So notice the 4x minus 9 is between 21 and negative 21. Look at that carefully. Make sure that makes sense. Anytime you have an and situation, you are between 2 values. Solve. So I'm going to add 9. When you add 9 to everything. Divide by 4. You're going to divide by 4 to everything. This is what's called a compound inequality. You are dealing with all the numbers from negative 3 to 15 halves. I'm going to put 15 halves on my number line. And so this is an and. So all the numbers that are in between negative 3 and negative 3 and 15 halves will work in this particular set. First, isolate the absolute value, just like you would when you go to solve it. 3x minus 2 is greater than 8. Greater than. A greater than symbol is an or. So if you have an or question, you are going to be greater than the positive or less than the negative. You're dealing with the extremes. So if I am greater than the positive to the right and I am less than the negative to the left, solve. So x would be greater than 10/3, or solve the other one, x is less than -2. What does that look like on the number line? Open circle at -2, shaded less. Open circle at 10/3. 10/3 would be approximately right here in between 3 and 4. Open circle, shaded to the right. Your homework assignment is P.2. If you have any questions, please make sure you talk to your teacher, and good luck.